Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Between the Vines. I'm Jennifer Phillips Russo, Viticulture Extension Specialist with Cornell University for the Lake Erie Regional Grape Program. This team is a two-state, two-land grant team made up of both Cornell specialists and Penn State specialists. But I'm here with one of our very special guests, Dr. Terry Bates, and today is September 18th, 2025. We are in the throes of harvest, as is most of you around the listening area. So thank you. I always want to say around the world because it blows my mind that this is downloaded in other countries. So welcome. Thank you for listening. Please let us know what you want to hear more about. But today, Terry's here to talk about this season, drought and how it might affect our vines, and just the overall what we can expect out of 2025 season here. So thank you for joining us again, Terry.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. I'm glad
You're
to
an
be
honorary co-host.
here. Always fun to be here.
Thank
In
you.
between harvest loads.
Yeah, I know. So I do have to say, we are in the throes of harvest, and I greatly appreciate you taking time to talk to our listeners about all of this. But we've received questions from not only growers, but also industry representatives wondering about the effect of this dry weather that we are having this season, and will it have implications in next year's growth and next year's fruiting?
Yep.
Yep,
Yes.
that's what it is. Yep.
So, I mean, let's set the stage for everybody. We kind of started off the year, looked great. I mean, it has been a great season. So it started off, we had plenty of water. We had some good heat. It was a little cool before bloom, which when we were doing our predictions on berry weight and stuff, that the cooler it is before bloom, the larger our berries end up being from a predictive standpoint. And then, mid-season, it turned dry. And like for the most part, since we started off with good soil moisture, the vines had plenty of water for a very long time. And now we're starting to see the effects of no rain for quite a while. Um,
Like,
right. And I think it's supposed to rain next week, so all this might change.
I
As
saw
soon as
that
we do a
too.
podcast on lack of water, we get the water. So maybe we
We
should
should do a podcast on frost. There's
should have
no
done it
frost.
earlier. Um, okay, let me share my screen.
Yeah. So are you going to share the berry curve first or no? Ah,
There we go. Would you see the guy blowing fire?
yes, I did.
That was in Italy. That was cool. Okay. Again, let's set the stage, framework looking at what the annual cycle is of the grapevine, whether you're, you know, getting a flush of spring growth where you're letting all the, stored reserves go to the growing shoots and the growing roots. Then in the middle of the summer, we have a lot of assimilation. So most of your photosynthesis and nutrient uptake are happening during the middle of the season. But now we're in this, what I call the partitioning part of the season. So I think one of the questions that we got was, what's going on with nutrient uptake this time of year? So what we see, so again, this is Concord vines, own rooted, unirrigated vineyards. So again, if you're listening to this around the world, you may be a completely different situation. You may be
Nice.
growing a different variety on a rootstock that you irrigate. And so this would change. I mean, I think the general remobilization, assimilation, partitioning, and storage, those phases of vine growth are universal, but kind of how they are tweaked based on what your actual economic situation is a little different. Okay, so what we see from vine excavation studies is that from veraison to harvest, there's actually not a lot of new nutrient uptake going on. Like we start to see the vines, like whatever, they start to shut down or change what they're doing because they're preparing to go into winter, right? They're going to ripen the fruit and they're going to get ready to go into winter.
Days are
So we,
getting shorter and they recognize that.
yeah, so yeah, it's a day length signal. Days are getting shorter, temperatures are starting to cool down. So the vine is just getting that trigger that, hey, it's time to ripen and go into winter. So we actually see very little new nutrient uptake happening from veraison to harvest. We see a lot of remobilization going on. So we talk about partitioning of resources, so partitioning of water, carbohydrates, and mineral nutrients. And in the world of, partitioning, people who study this, they talk about sink strength in a plant or a vine. And sink strength is a function of sink size and sink activity. And in grapes, from veraison to harvest, you determine the sink size for your fruit based on like your pruning level or whether or not you thin, how big of a crop are you hanging. And in this year, partially because of the frost we had last year, we're hanging a big crop this year. Some people estimated, some people did a little thinning, but in general, bigger crop this year. So our sink size with respect to fruit is very large. And sink activity, fruit is more active at this time of year than the vegetative structure. So we talk about vine balance. Is energy going into the wood? Is energy going into the fruit? So fruit wins out. Fruit's a stronger sink for carbohydrates and nutrients, especially with Concord with respect to potassium. So
Part of
sink.
getting that genetic information into the next generation, calling in the birds by ripening the
Oh
fruit.
yes.
Everything's about the fruit right now.
Yeah, so I mean that's the trigger is your seeds are ready to be dispersed. So what are you going to do? You're going to make your fruit, you know, juicy, sweet, and low acidity, so good to eat, so that something comes and eats it and spreads my seeds around. And that takes precedence over vegetative growth. So we typically see about 15 to 20% of mineral nutrients are getting shuttled back into the perennial structures of the vine. And about 50% of non-structural carbohydrates are going into the wood, right? You're packing your perennial structures full of starch and nutrients to survive the winter. And if you are hanging a big crop, so a big sink size and high sink activity, right? The fruit is taking that stuff at the expense of the wood. Um, so
So you're
that
going to
has
have smaller pruning weights. These are all
right.
things that
So
you've
we'll
talked
talk,
about
let's
before.
talk, yeah. So we'll talk about the implications for next year on that.
Mm.
So just kind of setting the stage, right? Big crop, we have dry weather, so we're having limited water, limited nutrients. How is that affecting photosynthesis and carbohydrates like kind of currently? Um, so we look at the berry curve information.
I love
So
that you do this, by the way. I just need to explain to our listeners, if they're just listening for the first time, that you have a set of vines, a certain set of vines that you test, correct?
yep.
And you go out and do your 100 count berry sampling, doing a
Yeah.
protocol that you're
So
grabbing it from different areas. I just want people to know what you track so they know what they're
yeah,
listening to.
so we've been tracking this. Yeah, we've been tracking it
Over
forever.
25 years.
Yeah, the chart I show is 24-year mean. And so we had this at Fredonia, and then we have it at our new lab in Portland. And for a couple of years, we did it in both spots to make sure that the data was compatible. Like and it is because we're basically at the same whatever, same latitude, same soil type. And so the phenology just kind of translated over to the new lab facility. We have a set of vines. We call them the phenology vines. We prune them the same every year. So to me, the power in the phenology block is to compare year to year. It's not to compare what my farm is doing versus what your farm is doing. It's just, how can we see seasonal differences in the berry curve on a standard set of vines. So this is the berry curve and the Brix curve. So the one chart's showing days from bloom, the other one is showing days from veraison. So fresh berry weight curve and juice solid with solids and Brix. And the black line is the 24-year mean. So that's kind of what we would expect to see on an average year, if there's ever such thing as an average year. Um, and then we compare like a particular season like 2025 with how's it comparing to last year, how's it comparing to the average curve. And this year again what we saw is that we got a lot of berry development very early, so a lot of rounds of cell division, so the potential for berry size is high. And then you see right in the middle of the season when we hit lag phase, starting to get dry, and we hit a very distinct lag phase, and then we hit veraison, and from veraison to harvest, the berries start to blow up with water. So most of the fresh weight gain at that point is water, and you're pumping in sugars. It's not The berries aren't like going through more cell division at that point. The balloon is just blowing up. Um, and so things are pretty much going along as normal. We hit veraison. Saw an increase in berry weight. We started to see accumulation in sugar, concentration in the fruit. And this past week, we're really starting to see the effects of the dry weather because the berry weight should continue to go up and it's flattening out. If we get rain next week, you're going to see that spike up like almost immediately. The vine's going to absorb that water and it's going to shuttle a lot of it to the fruit. And then with respect to sugar, I had a question from a grower yesterday. How come the sugar shot up so much last week? It's because the berry weight went flat. So normally what you see is the berry weight's going up and the sugar is going up. And as you go from veraison to harvest, the rate of sugar accumulation drops a little bit each week, just normally, right? Again, day length's getting shorter, temperature's getting cooler. There's kind of a feedback mechanism also. The more sugar that you're pumping into the fruit, right? It's like you're shoveling sand against the tide. It's getting harder and harder to pump sugar into the fruit. So it slows down. So when you compare the last 2 weeks, the slope of that line, the blue line, didn't change. It should have. It should have dropped a little bit, but it didn't. And partially that's because the berry weight has flattened off. So if you're a wine person, this is a good thing, right? Wine people want small berries, high sugar concentration, high skin to pulp ratios to extract those flavor compounds during fermentation from the skins. Typically with Concord, we want the bigger berries because we want to get paid for the weight. So
Well, that's a good point because you said we're possibly getting rain next week, and we anticipate seeing the berry size plump up and that balloon expand. The sugars, I would anticipate to kind of not flatten off, but definitely slow down as a dilution factor with rain
yeah.
next week.
So I mean, a part of it is this whole week has been sunny. And so we should be getting plenty of sugar, made through photosynthesis. So I would expect the concentration to continue to go up. But if the berries blow up, the rate's not going to be as high as we would expect.
Yeah.
So I kind of explain it as, and this is only going to make sense to people in Western New York. So say I'm Westfield and I have to drive to Albany, right? So I leave Westfield and I'm driving 70 miles an hour. By the time I hit Buffalo, I'm driving 60 miles an hour. By the time I hit Rochester, I'm at about 45 miles an hour. By the time I hit Syracuse, I'm at like 20 miles an hour. By the time I hit Albany, I'm like just trucking along at 5 miles an hour, right? It's going to take me forever to get to Albany. I start off great, but you slow down as you keep going. And that's the same thing that's happening here. Is it just you make it 55% of the way in the first 2 weeks after veraison, and after that things start to slow down. So if our weather goes south, everything else goes south too. So I also heard a great quote the other day. This kind of relates to harvest questions. So I heard a great quote that a farmer, by the time we get to this time in the season, like there's all the predicting and management and just racking your head over what you do in the vineyard. It's all done. There's nothing you can do at this point but pick the grapes. So a farmer, when they get to around harvest, they're already thinking about next year. Like it's like this season's already done. Like let's just get the fruit and get it into the plant. Let the winemakers worry about what to do with it. So what are we going to do about next year? So
Oh, that's a very good photo.
yeah, so there was a great article, and I can't remember the year. I put it in the email. So Alan Laxo and Bob Poole did an article. It was like 1998 or something. And it was a great article about like what happens under dry conditions. So 1998, 1999 were these warm, dry years. Actually, 98's the year I started, right? And when
Wow.
I started, the Concord growers like, hey, we need your help. We need, we got to grow bigger vines and bigger crops and get higher quality. And 1998, 1999 were big crop years. The fruit was dead ripe. I was like, what is the problem? Like, um, but because of those years that being dry, with people like Alan Laxo and Bob Poole were looking at, okay, what is the effect of dry weather conditions on the vine? And they talk about early but incomplete periderm formation when it's dry. So again, let's think about our partitioning. If all of the water and nutrients and carbohydrates are going into the fruit, they're not going into the wood. And it's not just periderm, in my opinion, that it's it's a reflective of all the vegetative growth of the vine, right? So at this time of year, they're like, we're not putting those resources into root growth. We're not putting it into storage starch in the perennial structures, right? So what that really means is you're having an overall decrease in vine size or vine capacity. So
Because you have a lot of fruit that it's trying to do. It's
yeah,
trying
so the
to.
fruit, yeah, the fruit is the strongest sink and it's taking all the resources. So what's going to suffer is the vegetative growth of the vine, which is your vine size and your yield potential or the capacity of the vine to support the yield for next year. So again, we're already thinking about next year. So here's the, I don't know what to say, the quandary about a dry year is early but incomplete periodal formation. So we know that the fruit primordia that are in the axils of the leaf and the cane,
Okay, I know what that is, but let's
yeah.
break that down for everybody else.
So, okay, so see the leaves on this shoot. So this is a shoot. It's showing potassium deficiency and it's showing that the basal leaves are showing the potassium black leaf symptoms, but the young leaves
Yes,
aren't because another sink for potassium is the growing shoot tip. So young leaves won't have potassium deficiency, and the fruit won't have potassium deficiency, but the older leaves will because the potassium is leaving the leaves and going to those two sinks
with the others. Mhm.
because it can't get it from the ground because the ground is dry and the roots aren't taking up new potassium. But I really show this picture because of the periderm. So in the axil of the leaf and the shoot, which is going to become the cane, within the axil, there's the fruiting bud for next year. And within the fruiting bud, we talk about there's three shoots that are being formed, primary, secondary, and tertiary. And on the primary shoot, there's cluster primordia. And
It's like the
Mark
blueprint for the clusters for
yeah,
next year.
it's like a little baby cluster that's in there that's not fully developed, and that's going to overwinter, and then it's going to finish developing in the spring until bloom when the flowers set. So Martin Goffinet, who was an anatomy person at Cornell, did a lot of work on this, and I like really love the work that Martin did. And he would show like there's 15 stages of bud development or 15 stages of that little baby shoot that's in there with the cluster primordia. There's 15 stages, and it makes it to stage 6 or 7 until before we hit dormancy. And then it goes from 7 to 15 in the spring. So what happens in the spring does affect it, but also what's happening now in the fall. And Martin showed that the buds on that cane develop sequentially throughout the season. So after the fruit sets in the middle of the summer, right, that those basal buds are already starting to develop and they develop sequentially down
The tip of the
through the
shoot.
shoot.
So they start at the base of the cane and all the way to the end.
Right. And so since we had such a good middle of the season, so from a predictive standpoint, like the middle of the summer was awesome, right? We had plenty of sunshine, plenty of water, plenty of nutrients, things look good. So my prediction would be on those base buds, so say, buds 2 through 5 or 6, that the bud fruitfulness is probably going to be average to above average, right? They're going to be at stage 6 or whatever, 6 or 7.
They're ready to
Um,
go.
But the rest of the shoot, as you can see, it's green there. That'll end up not. ripening off. Like the paraderm won't form. And so then when we get freezing temperatures, that part just dies off. So so there's really two things is what is the bud fruitfulness of those base buds that you're going to leave when you prune. So if you pruned 5 to 8 node canes, like how fruitful are those buds going to be? That's one. And number two is what is your vine capacity to ripen that fruit next year, which is reflective in the amount of paraderm or your vine size, because we talk about vine size all the time. So the kind of disconnect is I would expect that the base buds that we are leaving during pruning this winter are going to be, average to above average fruitfulness, but our vine capacity is now dropped.
because
So
it's such a large
should we,
crop out
yeah,
there.
you're going to set a nice crop next year, but are your vines going to be able to support that crop next year? So those, again, those are your management decisions you make over the winter. Again, some people, the only crop control they do is through pruning. So they need to take that into account. How many buds am I going to leave during pruning? Taking the risk or taking the prediction that I think that the bud potential is going to be pretty good? Or am I leaving more buds than I need, set that crop next year, and then go back and thin if I feel like I need to, based on what's happening next growing season? And a lot of people
So,
got experience with crop estimation and thinning this year. So they need to take that experience and say, yep, am I willing to crop estimate and thin again next year if I need it? Or I hated thinning, I beat up my vines, I didn't like it, and I'm going to do all my crop control through pruning. And so I have to take that into account this winter when I make my decisions.
I'm sorry to put you on the spot with this, but based on what I'm hearing and based on the weather that we've had in this growing season, you're feeling pretty secure, even with the drought-like conditions right now, that those basil buds are set up for next year. So the talk, and based on the Big Dig and Little Dig studies and knowing where all of your nutrients and minerals are being partitioned right now, they're not taking a lot up from the soil, that we shouldn't be overly concerned at this point for next year based on the drought conditions right now.
Correct. The yes.
Yes.
So yes. So I'll draw from the experiences we've had in dry summers before that the next year you come back, well, crop potential was pretty good. So the risk that you run into is I set a big crop potential for next year, but then next year turns out to be a 2003 where we have very cold conditions, late bloom, crummy summer, and it's like I set this big crop that I can't ripen.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's the risk. Or the benefit is, yeah, we set a big crop, we had another great year, and everything's wonderful. I mean, it's depends how you want to manage your vineyard. Um, right. So there are other viticulture areas that irrigate and don't rely on rainfall, and they can control water, and so they do a thing called regulated deficit irrigation, or yeah, they reduce the amount of water that the vines get in the middle of the season because they're looking for some of the very same things we're talking about. So as you like do a little bit of deficit irrigation, like the first thing that happens is your shoot growth slows down. So you're starting to control your canopy. The second thing that happens is your berry weight is smaller, which a lot of wine people like to have a little bit smaller berry weight. And then the third thing that happens is that photosynthesis drops. And
There's
that's
less
usually
leaf area
yeah,
and the
photosynthesis
water.
drops just because there's not enough water to
Got it.
maintain photosynthesis in the leaves. And that's usually during a deficit irrigation practice, you're trying to avoid that part, right? You want to slow down the canopy, you want to have smaller berry weight, but you don't want to run it so droughty that you slow down photosynthesis because then that would affect next year's crop. Like if we get to the point, and I'm sure there are some vineyards in New York right now that are so droughty that photosynthesis is dropped so low that it is affecting next year's crop potential.
Where would you
Stan,
think that would be?
yeah,
And I'm not
Stan,
saying, go
yeah,
ahead.
Stan Howell used to call it the finishing power of the season. He felt like there was something at the end of the season that like And I think it has to do with photosynthesis. Okay, so what you typically see, I know I have great charts on this too. Um, taken during these dry seasons like 1998, 1999, when you look at either pressure bomb readings on the leaves or gas exchange measurements on the leaves, what you typically see is, when it's totally well-watered conditions, photosynthesis, it ramps up in the morning and it stays high all day long, and the vines, you get tons of shoot growth and like everything's great. Right? If anything, the vines are over vigorous. And as you start to dry down, which is happens very common with our own rooted, unirrigated Concord, even in wet seasons, we can get dry spells in the middle of the season. What happens is photosynthesis starts high in the morning, it drops a little bit, and it'll vary depending on how dry it is. Say it drops down to like 50% of photosynthesis by midday. And then it comes back up by about 4 o'clock in the afternoon as the sun angle starts to go down. You see the photosynthesis start to come back up. And again, if there's plenty of water or you're getting regular rainfall, that kind of stays that way. So it starts high, goes low, comes back up. Starts high, goes low, comes back up. As the vine starts to dry down, or as the soil starts to dry down and the vine is feeling the effects of dry weather, the photosynthesis drops and it comes back up, but it doesn't come all the way back up. So it starts the next day a little lower. And that kind of follows that pattern, and it drops and it drops and it drops. And it gets to the point where like you're starting the day at 50% of photosynthesis and you're dropping to like 25% of your full capacity for photosynthesis on that vine. And that is where I think that's the trigger where you start to see like the vine is really suffering. The buds aren't developing, the shoots aren't growing, the roots aren't growing. I mean, you're really starting to get to the point where the vine is overstressed for water and you have a lot bigger problems. But you should also be able to see that pretty easily. I mean, the leaves are all flagged, they're warm to the touch because the stomates aren't open and there's no transpiration of water going on, and you're starting to get burned leaves or yellow leaves. That so it's pretty easy to spot a vineyard that's in that condition. And that's why I said I think there are some vineyards in our area that look that way because you drive past them and you're like, oh boy, that
Oh
person's in
boy.
trouble. Yeah. Um, but I think for the most part, in general, our good commercial vineyards, they're at that point where you may see photosynthesis drop during the day and you'll start to see those leaves flag. I'm sure you've seen it out in the vineyards. Like midday, you're like, whoo, that vineyard looks a little tired. But by 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it rebounds. And that's actually, I think, a good situation to be in because you're ripening the fruit. Things are going to be okay for next year. I'm concerned that the vine capacity will drop a little bit.
Because there's no water to go into it. It's all
Yeah,
going into
because
the fruit right
because
now.
the
It's not.
fruit the fruit's a stronger sink, and so it's everything it's got putting into the fruit, and it's taking it away from the vegetative growth. So your general vine capacity for next year is going to be lower than it was for this year. Because the exact opposite thing happened last year. We had a very low crop and lots of water. So
Yeah.
vine capacity, the vegetative capacity of the vine was very high.
Thank you for sharing all of this. I
Yeah.
if you would kindly share your slides, I would like to write a
Yep.
recap article on this as well, especially that one.
You like that? Yeah.
Yeah, that's fun. And I hope that this conversation sparked some more possible podcasts that you would like to share with us. I know we keep saying publish, 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 but this is another way to get that out there. I'll get all that information out there and all the research that you've done. Not that we're not going to publish or that Dr. Bates isn't going to publish his research. It just takes a lot of time, and we are obviously full speed
Yeah.
ahead with a lot of other things as well. So this is an avenue to
My
get
good
that
friend Keith
information out there.
Strigler at Gallo, who, if he's listening to this podcast, every time I talk to him, he wants me to write a production guide for Concord, which we've been talking about for 10 years.
Sounds
But
like we need to write a grant just to sit to do that. That's
no, no, we just got to do it.
But if any of this has sparked questions from our listeners, or even from you, Terry, on things like, you know what, we should probably talk about that, I would greatly appreciate your comments. Please feel free to email us. You can find our contact information on the internet. We're out there on our websites, lergp.com. Do you want to promote your website?
Efficientvineyard.com.
There's a lot of great information out there, and I have been putting in sections from efficientvineyard.com VIP blog in the Verasion to Harvest that's been going out. So that's another avenue. If you are not familiar with it, is Cornell puts out a Verasion to Harvest podcast and also a publication weekly with the ripening across New York State. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Dr. Bates, for joining us, my honorary co-host. And we will be back probably in a couple weeks. I know you're busy, but I have been asked to give some stuff while you're driving around the tractor to listen to. So give us some questions or comments and we'll make sure to address them. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe out there.